In today's video, we're going to be doing a Warlock subclass tier list for PvP, and this is being done during Season of the Witch or Season 22. Now, I want to set some parameters on how I'm kind of judging these. Kind of couple of things. I'm basically judging it off of ease of use. I think some people will argue that some of these subclasses could be ranked higher depending on the skill ceiling or how good you could potentially be uh, if you master one of these subclasses. But I think also ease of use should really play into what makes a subclass good, because if you have to be pinpoint perfect to make a subclass work for you, I could argue that it makes it a little less viable for majority of people. But again, this be going for PvP and specifically more for modes like trials and the competitive playlist versus 6v6, because 6v6 you can kind of make almost anything work because it's just so chaotic. So again, mainly 3v3 type modes is how we're going to be assessing these based on how easy they are to use and what's their maximum potential. We will still factor that in amongst other things. So let's talk about it. And I think some of you might find some of my picks controversial. And again, we're doing this just for Warlock. Let's talk about it. So I'm going to just kick things off going to what I believe is an S tier pick right now. And that is going to be Voidwalker. And I know a lot of you are already screaming and yelling in your chairs or wherever you're at that I didn't immediately put Solar. We will talk about Solar, but I think Solar is considered S tier by a lot of people right now for a very specific reason, which we'll talk about. But I do want to talk about Void Warlock and why I think it's S tier. And I think it's because, in my opinion, it's one of the best 1v2, 1v3 types of classes in the game. I think it has a lot of good things going in for it in its kit, with Void Soul being able to help you with energy regen, as well as slowing down your enemy and weakening them, allowing you to just take on so many different enemies at once. As you can see in this clip here, as I'm challenging all these people from playing my Rift and utilizing my Void Soul. You have Devour, you have a super that has a relatively low cooldown that is great for shutting down things like Well, Bubble, other supers that you can get fairly quickly, and is a great counter to those some of those more popular options, especially in the 3v3 modes. And oh dear god, I'm going into an ad, sorry folks. But from there you can kind of see why Void is so good. The survivability is super high, the energy regen is super high, all the fragments that are pretty good give you stat boosts. There's also fragments that when you get kills while you're relatively weak give you overshield. So Void overall and Warlock has a lot going for it, and I think that is why I think it is S tier, because along with all that, in my opinion, it's super easy to use, has great utility and a great kit overall that doesn't take a lot of setting up to make things work, or a lot of pinpoint skill, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think that's why Void, in my opinion, is S tier and arguably one of the best, if not the best subclass for Warlock overall. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room as another ad pops up. Thank you, YouTube. And let's talk about Solar. Solar is very, very good. I'm not going to sit here and pretend Solar is not great for Warlock. The ability to have extra AE with Heat Rises, Icarus Dash to get in and out of bad spots. And of course, I think the big selling point is going to be Well of Radiance, especially in modes like Trials, Dominion Trials, where you're capturing the point, and the really low super cooldown. But I think if Well or Bubble at any point get adjusted or nerfed, or Checkmate becomes the dominant mode where cooldowns are significantly reduced and super regen is significantly reduced, I could see these options specifically for Well of Radiance not being as popular. And I think a lot of what makes so many people want to use Solar Warlock is the fact that it has Well of Radiance. You get that, you're most likely gonna get your super first as long as you're not getting farmed. And overall, the kit is again very easy to use, in a lot of ways similar to Voidwalker with Celestial Fire and all of those options as well. Potentially you can do different like ignite builds and things like that. Obviously you have healing nades, and so there's just a lot going for it there. Again, very similar to Void, but I think a lot of that has to also do with Well of Radiance. So personally, I'm gonna put this subclass in A tier. Because I think long term, if Well of Radiance gets adjusted in PvP at all, this becomes a lot less viable. If someone's like, no, Appa, this is S tier, you're probably right. You're probably right. but I'm trying not to put too many of these in the same category. So if there was like an S plus tier, I could add in here, which maybe I should have, or an S minus. You could argue that this is like S minus. So maybe we will throw it up there as like an S minus tier. I know I'm probably gonna, like I said, get a lot of flack for choosing Voidwalker over Solar, but if you haven't tried Voidwalker on Warlock in a long time, I highly recommend going back to it and giving it another shot, because I think the overall kit is very, very good. I still think even with its popularity, it's somewhat underrated. Now, let's talk about A tier. I'm actually gonna put Strand here. I'm gonna put Strand. I think overall Strand has gotten a lot of improvements as I continue to get ads on YouTube, which is great. Ignore this dude. And I think the overall utility of the subclass has gotten a lot better since they've made some adjustments to it. Increase the damage of threadlings, change some of the fragments to give you more cooldowns or reduce cooldowns. I think the cooldowns overall on this build are really good. And I think as people have learned to use threadlings more, that has helped the overall efficacy of this build, because now a lot of more people are using the threadling grenade to kind of prime targets or move targets off their spot, which I think they're really great for. Of course, now you also have the Wanderer, which is great for getting you out of a terrible situation and moving you, getting you out of a terrible situation with taking very little damage. You can use the Wanderer to, or not the Wanderer, oh my god, Weave Walker to bait heavy as well, as part of my mix up there. And so I think all of that, when you combine the survivability, low cooldowns, ease of use, I think it all makes Strand Warlock really, really good, on the fact that now you can also sever targets, all that kind of stuff with Arcane Needle. So overall, there's just a lot of utility there that makes it very good. The biggest thing with Broodweaver that really holds it back, in my opinion, is the super. I think the super overall is very inconsistent. I think it's very inconsistent. You have to be like the perfect range. And also, depending how fast the target is moving, you can easily miss your target. Like the little needles just go around the target that you're trying to hit, and ultimately ends up doing a whole lot of nothing. So that's my biggest negative for Broodweaver, but overall, I think the overall kit is quite good. Again, based on the threadlings and utilizing those to their fullest ability, recommend Threadling Grenade, as you can see in the clips here, just to really prime your targets and get some easy kills. And again, now that we have Weave Walker back in PvP, I think that's also a incredibly good ability when used correctly, and somewhat leniently. You don't want to use it too much, because I think overall then it'll actually end up hurting you more than it helps you. Moving on, we have two left. We have Stasis and Arc. Might upset some people. We're gonna do, actually, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna change it up. We're gonna do Stasis first, and Stasis is gonna go in the C tier for me. I think Stasis overall Warlock is actually quite good. I think it's quite good, and the skill ceiling on it is very, very high. Meaning, if you're a really good player, you have really good discipline in how you hold angles and how you use your overall kit, and your understanding of your kit for Stasis. Stasis is actually quite good. But the thing is it requires all of those things, in my opinion, to be really effective. It has a great overall kit. You can freeze a lot of enemies, slow them. Of course, with Penumbral Blast, you can get a lot of kills, but you have to be super accurate. The super is very good as well, especially for dueling other supers, but the cooldown is also super long. And so the chances, and especially in these 3v3 modes, of you getting your super even before the whole match is over can sometimes be really low, or by the time you get it, it may not even matter. I think that's a huge negative to Stasis, and I think the cooldown could be lowered maybe one more tier, but I don't know. I think the biggest thing on this is the stat distributions are quite good with Shadebinder in terms of what you can get from using different fragments and things like that. But I think overall, because of that, the required skill level to make Stasis super good is what holds it back. On top of the fact that I think Cold Snap is probably the best nade for Shadebinder, and depending on how you use it, using Cold Snaps, and because the freezes are so short, it actually hurt you more than it helps you, because it puts you in this place where you freeze someone and now you're trying to fly in to go kill them, and you actually end up moving yourself out of a good position, out of map control, to try to go and get this kill or capitalize on this freeze kill, it ends up costing you more than it does helping you. Again, so that is why I think Stasis is in the C tier overall, because I think, again, the ease of use is just not there. And a lot of times people will end up hurting themselves more than not utilizing this playstyle. Last, but certainly not least, I might surprise people again, Stormcaller. I think Stormcaller is actually B tier. And I think because of a couple of things, I think the ease of use is really good between being able to use the sliding melee attack to get a really strong like one-hit kill or multi-kills on enemies. You just basically slide in, and while sliding, do your melee with your shotgun, and you're probably going to get at least 1 or 2 kills, at least, as long as you're timing it right. You also have, where is this? Is this solar? What is happening? Oh, is arc. Here we go. And so with that, and then also boosts or buffs to chaos reach. I think chaos reach is a little bit more viable now as well, and you can use it in a way where you can pair it with that sliding melee to also like give you a better positioning for your chaos reach, and on top of it having a really low cooldown. I think that is all great. You also get really good stat distributions from arc as well that help with like damage resistance, with melee regen and things like that. And so that's really makes arc overall, I think, really easy to use, really friendly, almost too friendly. I think the melee ability or the melee aspect is still a little strong, as you can see here. God, these fucking ads. But I think that's the main selling point for me on the arc, is you want to really spec into melee ability regen, so that way you can pull off the sliding melee attack to get a lot of multi kills, easy 1 kills. And again, especially in some of these 3v3 modes where getting that pick is crucial, this is a great way to get that first pick, or at the very least get a trade. And so combining that with a low super cooldown, good ability regen from a lot of the fragments and aspects, it just makes arc, in my opinion, actually quite good and quite underrated. I think if the supers were a little bit better, it would be even more highly rated amongst the community, but because of the poor super, like Stormcaller is just not good. In my opinion, it's just way too squishy. But I think Chaos Reach is somewhat viable. I would actually probably take it over the Broodweaver super, in my opinion, because at least it's a little bit more consistent. But overall, it's still not going to be quite as good as like a Nova Bomb or a Well, things of that nature. But the ease of use is going to be much better than something like Stasis. And so I think overall, when I look at this list, I think this is a pretty accurate breakdown of like, if you're trying to decide like what subclass you want to use for Warlock for PvP specifically, I think you'll have a good time easily with Void or Solar Warlock, again, because of their easy use, relatively low super cooldowns, of course, depending on your stats. And just again, the overall kits don't require a lot of setup. They're kind of plug and play, and you kind of just use them as you will. Even obviously the Void Soul will just literally do everything for you, because it'll just track forever to wherever someone is. And then next again would be like Broodweaver, I think is also very similarly very easy to use, very little setup. But again, you're gonna have to be a little bit more practice, a little bit more disciplined with how you use the super, and using things like Weave Walker if you're gonna use that. And then the B tier, you do have Stormcaller, which again, still not maybe as easy as these other three, but still going to be fairly easy overall, in my opinion, to use and have generous cooldowns, and still be pretty competitive in a lot of scenarios when it comes to trials and the competitive playlists. And then lastly, you have Stasis, where his last, which again, I know is going to set a lot. And actually, Stasis is personally one of my favorite subclasses, but I think the setup, the amount of skill and timing required to get the most out of the subclass, along with just the obscenely long super cooldown, really is what keeps Stasis in the C tier for me. Even as someone who I feel is pretty good at Warlock, I like to think, I just find even when using Stasis and using it to the best of my abilities, if I'm playing a really skilled team, it just makes that setup and that timing even harder, to where I know if I switch to any one of these, I'm already going to be in a much better place in terms of how much I can compete, because the setup required is a lot less, which means it's just there's more room for error when it comes to playing some of these better teams. But let me know in the comments, what do you think of this subclass tier list? What do you like? What do you disagree with? And what are you using the Crucible right now as your main? And hey, I'm open to some dialogue on what we think is best. If you think Stasis is the best, is S tier, hey, get me there. Let me know in the comments why you think it is the best, and I appreciate y'all watching.